I wanted to talk about a certain hot topic in the Kengan community right now, and I think it's also the Baki community, although I do think these communities kind of overlap a bit, mainly because the Kengan Omega and Baki mangas are just similar to each other in terms of they're about fights that are not nearly as, say, supernatural in the sense where there's lasers or something like that. Even though some of them can get insane, specifically with the two characters I'm going to talk about very soon, Yunjiro Hanma and Shen Wulong, it's usually not, let's say, DBZ level. It's not usually, Jujutsu Kaisen or Naruto level. There's an effort from both authors to leave that type of action to the wayside, you could say. But as of late, there's been a very interesting topic about Shen Wulong versus Yunjiro Hanma. Now, we have had crazy characters before in the Kengan verse, alright? I would say Kuroki is a very good example. Wakatsuki is a very good example of characters that are insanely powerful to the point where you could put them in the Baki series and they could do fairly well. They could basically fit in. But we never really had the Baki and Yunjiro Hanma level characters in Kengan, where Yunjiro Hanma and Baki are just so insanely powerful that they basically stand as the undisputed champs of the series, even in their own verse basically. And so it's no wonder, up until this point, up until Shen Wulong, if you were to ask both Kengan Omega fans, or at least your average Kengan Omega fan, who knew and read Baki, if there was any character in Kengan who stands a chance against Yunjiro Hanma, they would say, probably not, right? But now, with Shen, it's becoming more and more plausible. And I want people to more or less understand this phenomena that we are seeing right now. Off of the latest chapter, Lohan did say that essentially Shen is about as strong as a nation's military force, which is something that has been said about Yunjiro Hanma before, if I'm not mistaken. So you have two statements that are fairly similar to each other, right? Now, do they mean the exact same thing? Probably not. And are they both accurate? I don't think that's important. I think what's important is the trend. See, we have not seen the full power of Shen Wulong. No, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. And let me just explain this, because I have done this before where I talked about how Shen Wulong broke the Kengan community. I'll put it in the description. But when Shen Wulong fought Mukaku, he had to nerf himself to the lowest possible level. And even then, he still destroyed Mukaku. If you want to get a good idea of how strong Mukaku is, he was able to go toe-to-toe with Oma, with Oma coming out of that conflict not wanting to fight Mukaku anymore. You have Shen Wulong himself saying there's only really a handful of people that he knows that could beat him, one of them being Yan, so we'll see what that means specifically later. But then, when Nico asks Shen Wulong after Mukaku is dead, how strong was Gaio Mukaku? Shen replies to Nico that he's a master by your standard, by Nico's own standard. Now, a lot of people are going to say Nico should be at least, you could say, Edward Wu's level, or probably stronger than Edward Wu. And so, depending on how you interpret what Shen is saying here, you could say, at a minimum, what Shen is saying is that, oh yeah, Nico and Mukaku are more or less relative to each other. Worst case scenario, Mukaku is actually stronger than Nico if Nico considers him a master by Nico's own standard. And so, we're looking at the top of the verse. Mukaku could fight basically Kuroki high diff. And when that begins to sink in, that Shen had to nerf himself just to fight someone that powerful, and that up until this point, there's only really one character who seems to be able to comprehend, or we've seen his perspective of how he comprehends Shen's power, and that is Zai Ji, surprisingly. Surprisingly, Zaiji was one of the people who can comprehend Shen Wulong's power, probably because he's been with him for a while and he's insanely high potential. Zaiji is powerful, he just sucks at fighting. And so that is where this situation becomes very interesting. It isn't that Shen Wulong now has all the feats and all the statements. No, it's not because of like, oh, he said he was a one-man army like Yunjiro. No, it's that it seems as though these statements about him are turning out to be true. He's turning out to be a living legend. And so far, we cannot comprehend how powerful Shen Wulong is, other than the fact that he just gaps the majority of the verse, essentially. And what might be even more interesting is that if we end this series, there might be a few other characters, like say for example, Ryuki, Koga. If you've ever watched my theory video on the end of Oma, you could say Shen Oma, putting in some agendas in there. A handful of people could end off the series being around Shen Wulong's level. There's also Lohan, who could be the second strongest considering he's a clone of the Connector. Although that's an entirely different can of worms that I'll probably get to another time. However, it seems as though the Kengan-verse essentially is jumping into what is essentially the next tier. And it is the Baki tier. We are seeing this in real time, depending on how this series, of course, goes on from this point on. Maybe if there's another sequel after that, who knows? Or maybe if, again, because it's entirely possible that Shen Wulong might not even be the strongest Shen. Again, it's insane to think about, but remember when Mukaku, the last moments before Mukaku dies, he does ask Shen Wulong who he is. And it seems as though there's something about what Shen said that made essentially Mukaku question his identity, whether he is the same Shen Wulong or Shen that he met 100 years ago. So there's just so much. And so I think this debate more or less shows that we are basically going into a new era or a new tier of power when it comes to Kengan, where we can now, I think as we go on with the series, we'll get a lot more feats, we'll get to see what Shen can do a lot more, and he's probably going to live up to the hype. I'm going to keep it a buck. And this debate between Yunjiro Hanma and Shen Wulong will be, you could say, a bit more of an interesting topic. Although right now we have next to nothing in terms of feats. In terms of like Shen Wulong being an actual fight where he's going all out. We don't have that yet. But that's it. That's the video. Don't forget to like and sub if you enjoyed it. If you made it this far, hey, thank you. And until next time, take it easy.